The United States is a vast country, but one of its largest states, Alaska, is separated from the rest by Canada. Alaska, known as the last frontier, sits far to the northwest, detached from the contiguous 48 states. This means the US relies on Canada for a direct land connection to Alaska, a rare situation for any nation. Looking at a map, you see the US, then Canada, and only after crossing British Columbia and the Yukon do you reach Alaska. This separation has shaped the relationship between the US and Canada for over 150 years, ever since the US bought Alaska from Russia in 1867. Back then, many mocked the purchase as Seward's folly, but Alaska's value soon became clear. Yet the challenge of distance and separation remains unchanged. Alaska is an American exclave, dependent on Canada for land access. For Alaskans, businesses, and the military, the Canadian corridor is a lifeline, not just a line on a map. Supplies, people, and commerce all flow through this artery. The relationship between Washington, D.C. and Ottawa is crucial. The stability and openness of the border are practical necessities for Alaska's well-being. Without Canada's cooperation, Alaska would be isolated from the rest of the U.S. This unique geography makes the U.S.-Canada partnership vital. The daily reality of Alaska depends on this international connection. Canada isn't just a neighbor, it's a land bridge to Alaska. The Alaska Highway, built during World War II, is the most famous part of this connection. Constructed out of military necessity, it now serves as the main land route between the lower 48 and Alaska. This road allows families to move, truckers to deliver goods, and tourists to explore both countries. Without it, everything and everyone would have to travel by sea or air, far more expensive and unreliable. Maintaining this link requires constant cooperation: customs, border security, road maintenance, and emergency services. Canadian and American officials work together daily to keep traffic flowing smoothly. The highway is a symbol of deep integration and mutual benefit. For the US, it's the only practical land route to Alaska. For Canada, it brings commerce and tourism to its western provinces. The small towns along the route depend on this steady stream of travelers. The land bridge is more than a road, it's a shared economic and social space binding the two nations. The Alaska Highway is the backbone of movement between Alaska and the rest of the US. Thousands of vehicles, families, military, tourists make the journey each year, possible only with Canada's cooperation. Trucks carry everything Alaska needs: construction materials, medical supplies, consumer goods, and equipment for vital industries. Disruptions would mean empty shelves, stalled projects, and higher costs for Alaskans. Alaska also sends goods south, integrating its economy with the rest of North America. The border process is predictable and professional, making business possible. If that trust broke down, costs would soar and supply chains would falter. Canadian cooperation is the invisible force keeping this system running. The seamless flow of people and goods depends on this unique partnership. Alaska is far more than a frozen outpost. It's a powerhouse of resources and strategic value. Its oil fields like Prudhoe Bay have fueled the U.S. for decades, with the Trans-Alaska Pipeline carrying oil south. Alaska's military bases are America's front line in the Arctic, monitoring threats and projecting power. As Arctic shipping lanes open, Alaska's strategic importance only grows. The fishing industry supplies much of the nation's seafood, and tourism draws visitors from around the world. Nearly 750,000 Americans call Alaska home, relying on the rest of the country for connection and support. Alaska is a cornerstone of U.S. economic strength, security, and identity. Any threat to its accessibility is a national issue. That's why the U.S.-Canada relationship is so critical for Alaska's future. Imagine a crisis. Canada closes its land border to Alaska-bound U.S. traffic after a political dispute. Suddenly Americans can't drive to Alaska, and trucks are barred from the Alaska Highway. The land bridge, once a symbol of friendship, is slammed shut. The impact would be immediate. Families stranded, tourists stuck, and Alaskans feeling isolated. Supply chains would collapse. Perishable goods spoil, store shelves empty, and prices skyrocket. Only air and sea routes remain, both costly and limited. The Alaskan economy would grind to a halt. The U.S. military would face logistical nightmares with routine movement of supplies and personnel disrupted. Maintaining readiness in Alaska would become far more expensive and complicated. For the U.S. government, this would be a major crisis. The unprecedented denial of land access by a close ally would demand an immediate response. The stakes would be high for both countries. The well-being of Alaskans and the stability of the region would hang in the balance. The crisis would test the strength of the US-Canada partnership like never before. In this scenario, a political figure like Donald Trump would react with outrage. He'd call it a disgrace, accusing Canada of disrespect and betrayal. "They can't do that to us. We're the United States of America," he might declare. Trump would likely target the Canadian Prime Minister, claiming weakness and poor leadership. He'd threaten massive retaliation, tariffs on Canadian goods, economic pressure, and a promise to reopen the border by force if necessary. "We protect them, we trade with them, and this is how they repay us." It's a sad day for Canada. The rhetoric would escalate the crisis, turning a logistical problem into a full-blown international standoff. Such brinkmanship would risk deepening the diplomatic rift, making negotiation harder. A trade war would hurt both economies, disrupting supply chains and raising prices. The aggressive stance could cause Canada to dig in, prolonging the standoff. The crisis would become a test of wills, with Alaskans caught in the middle. The stability of the North American partnership would be at stake. The world would watch as two allies faced off over a vital connection. The outcome would shape the future of US-Canada relations. The lesson: even the closest partnerships can be tested by crisis. The hypothetical border crisis reveals a simple truth. Good relations between neighbors are essential. The US and Canada share the world's longest peaceful border, built on diplomacy and mutual respect. This friendship enables cooperation like the Alaska Highway, making complex things seem simple. Billions in trade and millions of travelers cross the border with ease, until something goes wrong. We often take this seamlessness for granted, noticing its value only when it's gone. The Alaska situation shows that trust, not just infrastructure, connects nations. Trust requires constant maintenance, communication, compromise, and empathy. A political firestorm can damage that trust in an instant, with lasting consequences. Around the world, nations face a choice: rivalry or partnership. The US and Canada chose partnership, leading to shared prosperity and security. Alaska's connection was solved with friendship, not force. The most important link is the trust that crosses the border. Being a good neighbor is one of the wisest investments a nation can make. The Alaska border crisis didn't just send shockwaves through North America, it made headlines worldwide. News outlets from London to Tokyo analyzed every development, speculating about the future of the world's most peaceful border. World leaders weighed in, urging calm and dialogue. The European Union called it a test for international cooperation, while allies like the United Kingdom offered to mediate, hoping to preserve the stability they've long admired. Behind closed doors, diplomats scrambled to reassure each other. If the US and Canada could stumble, what did that mean for other close neighbors? Countries with sensitive borders watched closely, fearing that mistrust could spread like wildfire. Global alliances faced new questions. Could old friendships unravel? Would economic ties withstand political storms? The crisis served as a wake-up call. At summits and in embassies, leaders revisited their own partnerships, realizing that trust is fragile, even among friends. In the wake of Alaska's ordeal, nations everywhere were reminded. The world is connected not just by borders and treaties, but by the invisible threads of trust and respect. When those threads are tested, the whole world feels the tension. When the border closed, the economic consequences were immediate and severe on both sides. Trade between Alaska and Canada, once seamless, ground to a halt. Trucks carrying food, fuel, and everyday goods sat idle at checkpoints, perishable cargo spoiling by the hour. Local businesses in Alaska and the Yukon felt the pinch first. Grocery store shelves emptied out, gas prices soared, and supply chains that once flowed freely now buckled under the strain. It's a textbook case of how interdependent modern economies have become, explained Dr. Karen Lee, a cross-border trade analyst. A disruption in one link ripples across the entire chain. What happens in Tok, Alaska, is felt in Whitehorse, Yukon, and beyond. For families living near the border, the impact was personal. Commuters faced hours-long detours. Medical supplies, once delivered overnight, were delayed for days. Some Alaskans, cut off from Canadian roads, found themselves isolated from vital services. Meanwhile, Canadian exporters watched millions in trade vanish overnight. Lumber, seafood, and manufactured goods destined for U.S. markets sat in warehouses, unsold. The shockwaves reached as far as Vancouver and Seattle, where interconnected industries struggled to adapt. Experts drew parallels to past crises: the 2003 SARS border closures, the 2011 Fukushima supply chain shock, reminding viewers that economic resilience depends on open borders and mutual trust. As one economist put it, when neighbors stop talking, their economies start suffering. It's a lesson the world can't afford to ignore. In the aftermath, both countries faced hard questions. Could their economies recover? And what would it take to rebuild the trust that made cross-border life possible in the first place? In the wake of the crisis, leaders on both sides of the border realized that division comes at a steep price, one no community, business, or family can afford to pay for long. Quietly at first, then with growing urgency, diplomats began talks to reopen the border and re-establish the ties that once made these northern regions thrive. Negotiations were not easy. Mistrust lingered, and old wounds reopened. Yet, shared history and mutual dependence proved stronger than suspicion. Through marathon meetings and careful compromises, new protocols for trade, travel, and health were hammered out. Border checkpoints transformed from barricades back into gateways, and the first trucks to cross again were met with cheers and relief on both sides. Communities that had felt isolated found new ways to connect virtually at first, then in person. Local governments and businesses worked together to reinforce supply chains, ensuring that future disruptions would not hit as hard. Importantly, both nations recognized the need to invest in ongoing dialogue, transparency, and shared emergency planning. The experience left scars, but also valuable lessons. It reminded everyone that borders are not just lines on a map, they are lifelines linking people, economies, and destinies. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but the will to do so is the foundation of any true partnership. As the roads reopened and goods began to flow, a spirit of cooperation returned stronger for having been tested. The story of the Alaska-Canada border crisis stands as a powerful reminder when nations work together, even the deepest divides can be bridged. In a world more connected than ever, our greatest strength lies in our willingness to listen, learn, and build a better future together.